Welcome and thank you for your time this afternoon. We understand the programme team is asking quite a lot of you at the moment with design playbacks and planning playbacks and so on. But we've tried to make the best use of the time and make it worth your while to be here. So this session is basically just to introduce you to the working draft of the programme plan that's now being consulted on. This is a working draft. We expect it to change quite a lot as it's developed during the consultation period, as you would imagine. But our aim at the end is to agree a baseline plan for the programme, for the MHHS programme by the year end. That's important because we don't really have a programme plan at the moment. We have validated, or we have an official timetable that needs to be validated through the planning process. But before I get into the meeting directly, we have a message from Rachel Clark at Ofgem, who is our programme sponsor.
Hello, I'm Rachel Clark, and I'm Deputy Director at Ofgem, with responsibility for retail systems and processes. I have been ultimately accountable for the implementation of the switching programme, which has now gone live, and I'm the Ofgem programme sponsor for market-wide half-hourly settlement. I want to take a moment to reflect on the importance of the market-wide half-hourly settlement programme and why we are keen to see it implemented as soon as is practically possible. MHHS is a vital step on the way to increasing the flexibility of the electricity system so that we can decarbonise the energy sector in the most cost-efficient way. As such, it provides an essential underpinning of our ability to meet the UK's net zero commitment. And the more efficient use of the energy system that MHHS will facilitate will help to keep the costs of energy down for all consumers. This is more important than ever before at a time when consumers and businesses are facing unprecedented electricity costs. This is why Ofgem considers it imperative that the industry should ensure that implementation of MHHS is done as quickly as possible. When we introduced obligations on all market participants to act in accordance with the transition timetable that we established in April last year, we wanted to be clear that we expect all market participants to prioritise implementation of MHHS in such a way that they can support a swift implementation. We cannot afford this programme to be held back because some parties do not appreciate the urgency for implementation. As was envisaged, the programme is now carrying out a full plan review to establish a detailed, robust, credible and achievable plan for MHHS implementation. Ofgem supports this plan review. It is essential that the programme has a considered, evidenced and robust plan that all parties can believe in and operate in accordance with. It is also essential that this plan, when finalised, delivers the quickest achievable route to implementation. In support of that, I have asked MHHSP to press all of you on what the minimum timescales are for activities and to look for all possible ways of minimising the time to go live without jeopardising the fundamental requirement for a robust, credible and achievable plan. We expect all programme participants to apply the necessary resources and the necessary priority to implementing MHHS so that this important change can be delivered as soon as possible and start delivering the expected consumer and market benefits. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this critical programme.
Okay, great. So that's clear enough and important to make that statement from our sponsor to start with. We'll go through this agenda today. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so it will be better if you hold the questions until the end, possibly because we hopefully are going to be answering them in later slides in this presentation. So we will offer you the opportunity at the end for a lot of questions. So thank you if you could hold off on that for now. If we look at the next slide, then that's the agenda. So as far as I want to go through the introduction to the objectives of the planning exercise, the consultation process, and the principles that we're following in developing the plan. So starting off with the introduction, as you heard, our objectives are to fully consult on and assess ways to ensure that the plan is set up to implement as quickly as possible, as Rachel mentioned. But it's also to form a baseline programme plan that can be approved by Ofgem, but on the basis of a weight of agreement from programme participants that it's the right plan and it can be realistically achieved. So we want to do that by working with you, with industry participants, to develop the plan, not imposing a plan from the central programme team on industry. That's really important, and I'll come on to that several times as we go through talking about the approach we're taking. But it's really important that we get the feedback and we get the working with you right, so that we can provide the evidence that Rachel was asking for to back up whatever timeline that we come up with through this consultation process. So the plan that we put out on Monday for consultation is a working plan based on the information available to us at the time. It's not been approved by Ofgem, and we will need to challenge and validate all assumptions in the draft. We've said that we will do a left to right planning process to start with, which is what we've been doing, and we've been doing that with some of the participant volunteers as well, the programme project managers from participants who have volunteered. So this process of round one consultation is also do a bit of right to left pressure on the plan to see if there are options to deliver more quickly, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to recognise round one in that context. And basically we're looking to deliver this plan, and the programme's outcomes are all around enabling benefits to be realised, not realising the benefits themselves, which are subsequently realised by industry activities. So if we go on to the next slide, please. For the consultation process itself, I've outlined what's happened so far in terms of the volunteers that have been involved with this in the last 3 months to, if you like, knock the rough edges off the plan. Round one is looking at the plan at a high level. It's top down. It's looking at the structure, the durations of the activities, the sequencing. It's testing the high level assumptions and related risks. It's not focusing on the absolute dates, because we need to get everybody across all the participants familiar with the plan, and it's an awful lot to bite off in one go. So getting the structure and testing those things is an important precursor to arriving at dates. Round two is where we put out a plan that does have much more detail and clarity on dates. And then subject to PSG agreement next week, there is a proposal to do a slightly, quite a short round three, a couple of weeks round three, which is happening after M5 and the baseline design being approved, just to allow for any by exception comments that might arise from anything that happened in the final days of the design activities. I don't anticipate there's going to be much there for round three, but it's there just to provide some comfort and a safety blanket. So in the context of that consultation process, what I wanted to point out is that round one is the really important part of this process. You know, we need to collect information from you, and we recognise we've asked you a lot of questions in the consultation document. There are about 50 odd questions that we've asked you. Some of them are quite quick to answer, and other ones require much more thought. But round one is the point where we need you all to make the effort, because this is where you'll make the difference to the planning process. By the time we get to round two, we're beginning to formalise the plan and settle it, and your ability to influence it becomes slightly less in terms of the big elements of it. So I would encourage you to consider that this isn't the case of, well, we won't do too much in round one, we can always catch it up in round two. No, round one is the really essential process where you influence upstream the activities, which is the lesson we want to learn from other programmes, right? That industry should be involved in this, and industry need to make the effort upstream to ensure that we form the programme plan in the right way before we end up in situations that are very hard to reverse. So the 4 weeks you have this week and the following 3 weeks in round one consultation are an opportunity for you to give us that feedback, give us the information, help us generate the evidence that backs up whatever timeline we think is emerging from this activity. But we're not focusing on the absolute timeline, we're focusing on the structure and the evidence that backs up our thinking about how long activities might take and how they can be compressed and accelerated and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to make it really, really clear that, we'll keep an eye on this, but I'm really hopeful that we'll get a lot of feedback in round one. it'll give us a lot to do. We've said that we will continue to engage with the volunteer planning working group as we get to the back end of round 1 and we start to iterate the plan and prepare it for round 2. We're going to be re-engaging with the pre-consultation volunteers, the ones in the planning working group. And I would say that the door is still open to volunteers. If you're a program or project manager and you're responsible for your organisation's delivery plan, you are welcome to join the band, the happy band of volunteers who have been really helpful. But it gives you a bit of an inside track on the plan's development, and you have a further chance to influence. So we're absolutely open and encouraging further volunteers, provided that you have that role or responsibility in your organisation and you want to have more of an in on what's happening before round 2 starts. Then I would also ask you to look at that. Okay, move on, please. You'll have seen this slide before. I'm not going to go into detail. The principles that we've been following and will continue to follow in the planning process are these. You'll have seen them before. I just point out again, industry shaped at the bottom there. It's supposed to be a plan we work on and develop with you, and round 1 is where you shape it. I won't reinforce that any further. You've probably got bored now. If we move on to the next slide, well, we wanted to briefly go through planning terminology. We had one of these sessions this morning. It turned out this was actually quite helpful to 1 or 2 people who probably were less familiar with some of the terminology and possibly hadn't been involved in previous programs like faster switching, where the terminology has been used quite a lot. So just very briefly, I wanted to go through and make sure that we're all on the same page in relation to this. So control points provide the demarcation between the key phases of the program, for example, between design, build, test and integration testing. So it's a decision to be made at each control point. It's not a checkpoint. It's a decision to stop, pause or proceed with the program based on a conscious decision about whether we're ready to do that or not. So at each control point, we basically evidence the health of the program. A separate control point review will be chaired by the program director and conducted before the PSG that receives the results of that review. And control points look at things like the amount of change that's going on, the amount of risk that the program is carrying, the suitability of the forward plan, participant readiness, and so on. So they're quite important things. And we also use the opportunity then to refresh the delivery and change strategies and assess progress on meeting the program outcomes. All of that stuff is really important to do at key points in a program like this. For milestones, they're more obvious. They're basically a familiar device to focus delivery activities and to provide important points of control. And in our working draft of the plan, we've also provided a milestone register outlining the milestones we have there at the moment. We've focused on naming and the level of governance that is applied to those milestones and the dependencies between milestones. We haven't majored on the more detailed descriptions of the milestones and so on, because that will be refined and developed as part of the round 2 documents. Can move on, please. So critical path, critical threads, for those who have worked on fast switching, will be quite a familiar set of terms. So the key question is the path to where. That's the critical path is obviously the path to go live, whereas critical threads are the paths to the next control point. So between the start and end of each phase, we're looking at a critical path of activities to get to the next end of that phase and the start of the next one. So on all these activities that are on the critical path or critical thread, we need to determine which activities those are, because if those activities delay, they effectively delay the program and they delay the end of that phase. So we always look at each phase of the program in isolation with a critical thread through the plan, and we identify tasks which could put at risk that timeline. On readiness assessments, these will support the control point conversations, and they'll also support reviews at other key points in the program's delivery. And they'll provide an important top-down check on participants' readiness or progress, which we'll use in conjunction with our SI assurance activities that tend to look at the same subject bottom-up. So with a top-down readiness check and bottom-up assurance activities, we should be able to get, from a programme perspective, a good understanding about participants' readiness and progress, and actually be able to raise concerns early. And the process for readiness assessments is a fairly tried and tested process that we've used before. We know that the questionnaires can be quite heavy, So we're always going to be seeking to balance the time to do the work against the value of seeking the information. And we recognise that internally in your organisations, you have to go through internal governance before you can send them back. So we're trying to balance to make them light enough, but still valuable enough to allow you to conduct those assessments in a reasonable way. Move on, please. The next section of this deck is the artifacts. So we think everybody's aware of the main planning artifacts, but just wanted to make, again, a specific check. So in round one, we've shared with you a number of artifacts to support your thinking and the answering of the questions in round one consultation. On the plan on a page and RAID information, we combined them in one document for round one. So we've given summary RAID information and the plans on a page for each phase of the programme, because obviously you can't look at a plan on a page without looking also at the RAID summaries that we have. So that's one document which should make it a bit more, make it easier for you to look at those elements. We then have sent you an Excel document, which is essentially the programme schedule. And that is showing all of the durations and activities and sequencing of those activities bottom up. We've also sent you a milestone register that I was talking about earlier. We're not sending you the artifacts 4, 5, and 7 because we don't think they're particularly helpful, and they'll be distracting, and it'll just be an extra work for you to do in round one, whereas we need you to focus on the important things. And then, of course, the RAID information is planning RAID information. It's RAID related to getting the plan settled. But as you know, the wider programme RAID is available now through the portal, through the digital PMO tool. So you can go in and slice and dice RAID information to your heart's content. But the stuff we've sent you, we think is most pertinent to the planning process and the planning outcomes we're looking to achieve. Next slide, please. Planning hierarchy. It's important to think about how the plan will be governed and how it will be linked to governance forums and decision making. So we've set out the milestone levels in tiers. Tier 1 being programme steering group, and tiers 2 and 3 being the advisory group level. And the reason that we've done it like that, first of all, we call them tiers, not levels, because otherwise we start getting confused with governance levels, because of course advisory groups are level 3 and programme steering group is a level 2 governance group. So we've called them tiers to avoid confusion. And on the next slide, we've basically just articulated the, we can get the next slide, yeah, that one. So a tier 1 programme steering group governs the tier 1 milestones until and unless they go outside the remit of the PSG, in which case they get escalated to Ofgem as sponsor. And Ofgem is part of PSG anyway, so they'll get sight of those milestones even if they're not moving outside the boundaries of the PSG's authority. And then, as I say, tier 2 and tier 3 are managed at advisory group level. That's relatively straightforward, I think. Go to the next slide. Boring slide is probably the most boring slide in the pack. Just to let you know the naming convention for milestones. So in the milestone names, we capture the governance level, the tier. We cover the area of work, that the work stream that the milestone pertains to, and then we have a numbering scheme that follows that. So it should be relatively clear, and those numbering that numbering system is evident in the milestone register that you have. Next slide. Right, now we get into the meat of the conversation. So we want to give you an overview of the plan, and as we said at the beginning, it's a working draft. We want to, in this section, go through, didn't want to get to that slide yet. We'll get to that slide in a minute. Yeah, so I want to go through how we're approaching the delivery. And I want to make sure that you're clear on what we see as the obstacles or the potential obstacles and the uncertainties we see at this point in the plan. But it's an early part of the planning process, so there are quite a lot of uncertainties, which is natural at this stage. So to remind you, this plan is a high-level document to just get your views on structure, sequencing of activities, durations, test the high-level assumptions and risks. This is not focused on absolute dates, which is why you'll probably notice there are not many dates here. The dates will be the focus of the round 2 of the consultation. The focus has got to be, not being distracted by dates, but looking at the critical part and the sequencing of activities and whether the durations are realistic. For round 1, that's sufficient of a task and a challenge for all of us to get consensus on those sorts of things. So if we now move on to the next slide, which is the overall programme plan on a page. So make some comments before I hand over to Kate to do the rest of the main presentation. So this is the overall plan on the page for the programme. It starts, the replan starts from M5, M3, and it acknowledges and it accommodates some of the early activities we know have to be done. Now, some parties will have done their high-level impact assessments and the IT and started their IT procurement activities, but there may be other parties who have not yet or only just starting. So we've tried to accommodate some timelines in the plan that address that. And we're also accommodating parties that do or don't intend to go through SIT, because they go through different paths in that plan, which Kate will explain. And then we have, again, central systems outlined separately. So the parties that are providing the core capabilities. So as you would imagine, the DIP provider, Electron Central Services, DCC, and so on. So those are key elements of the way we laid out the overall structure of the plan. And we've set out the assumed timelines for the DBT part on the left-hand side, based on quite a lot of feedback during the planning working groups, the volunteers that joined with us over the last 3 months. There were 1 or 2 outliers. There were 1 or 2 parties that said it would take much longer, and 1 or 2 that said they could do it more quickly. But primarily the feedback was in this range, and that's why we've put it in at that level. And we've taken the back-end systems DBT off the critical path. So this is the DBT for the consequentially impacted systems that are not directly interfaced with MHHS, but are affected by the changes in the settlement operations. The participants DBT for systems that directly interface with the TOM are shown separately. Those are the shorter durations. We've also outlined where qualification testing may start, and Kate will explain more about this, but just to say, it starts when key parts of SIT are complete, but not waiting until the whole of SIT is done. And migration and go live are based on assumptions about how that might happen. But rather than stealing Kate's thunder on that one, I'm just going to hand over to Kate now for any further comments on this overall plan before she then gets into more detail. Thank you, Kate.
Sorry, just trying to get my camera on. Right, finally. Yeah, thanks, Keith. Okay, so I think it's quite helpful to explain a bit more on this diagram before we go into the supporting details. So you can see that we've split it into 4 swim lanes, the top 2 being tracking through with SIT participants, and the top 2 SIT participants and then non-SIT participants, and then coming together as all participants in the cutover and migration. And then we've got central systems at the bottom also feeding into the 3rd one. So starting with a SIT participant, I'll just go through the sort of the rationale behind the timings and the critical path and so on. So you've told us through the planning working groups that you need 3 to 4 months once the design has been agreed to finish off your impact assessments, to do some immediate planning for the next few months, and also to do some high-level planning for the whole of the programme. And you can see there in that 5 months, there's also some procurement, because if you need to do some procurement, that's giving you a bit more time to do procurement. So what we've said is that after the first 4 months, you should be in a position to start DBT, and that you've got a 12-month period for that. And that is the DBT of the things that are required for SIT. So that is absolutely not suppliers back-end systems. It's not billing systems. It's not sales. It's not CRMs. It's none of that stuff. It is basically the services, in other words, the metering services, data services, registration service, network operation services, and UMSO, all of those services, plus on the supplier side, any market interfaces. So, for example, if you've got DCC adapters that need changing and things like that, that's what we need there. So completion of development of those things then can feed into SIT. And we've assumed that once you complete that development first, and then you move on to looking at back-end systems. So, if in your case, if you're a service provider of market interfaces, you can, at that point, you can look at how your interface is going to work out the back end to CRMs, for example. So we've got SIT execution running for just over 18 months. We've based this on looking at equivalent programs, and in particular, we looked in quite a lot of detail at what happened on faster switching, and with a bit of insight into why things happened in the way that they did and where things could have happened more quickly or whatever. So we've said SIT execution 18.5 months, and as Keith said, we're going to drop into qualification. I'll come onto that when I describe the non-SIT participants. We're going to drop into qualification before the end of SIT. But if you're a SIT participant, basically we get to a certain point in SIT, which will, for example, not include SIT operational testing, which we think participants will not participate in, that it will be simply us doing that with the DIP provider. So we get to a certain point in SIT, and then we say to SIT participants, okay, the end-to-end sandbox is now open for your execution of whatever other tests you wish to run. So a SIT participant will probably be doing some SIT tests in parallel with that still, but that's at a point where we're confident enough in the solution and all of its components that we can say, okay, go use the end-to-end sandbox. And that's the intention there, is to give suppliers and obviously service providers a decent amount of time to test everything that they need to test. It's not part of tests that we mandate. And then from there, end-to-end sandbox testing. So it's important to note that the environment, the UIT environment on which the end-to-end sandbox testing will take place, is an enduring environment. Now we've shown it not as enduring here because we want to show what we think will be the execution path of participants in this program, that they'll do sandbox testing and then that will stop as they go live. But it is an enduring environment, and if you need to do further releases, you can test on it, new entrants can test on it, and so on. Okay, so then the end-to-end sandbox testing after many months, when it's about sort of half to 2/3 of the way through, we'll drop down to preparing for cut over to live for the advanced and unmetered segments. And what we've done here is we've partly respected the Ofgem transition timetable and the CCDG recommendations about migration, but with a bit of an important difference. So we've said, in line with the transition timetable, we've said advanced and unmetered segments go first, and we've got, I think, 2 months difference in time between that and when smart non-smart goes live. And we've also got the central systems going live slightly a month before the advanced and unmetered, just to get that done, and in case there are any issues, that those can be ironed out. Now, that's the latest date for the go live of central systems. Obviously, the central systems can go live earlier if they wish to. It's just that this, certain bits of functionality won't necessarily be executed, but yeah, the support for things needed for market-wide half-hourly settlement must be there by M10, which is a month before advanced and unmetered go live. So the main difference in the migration philosophy that we've assumed for the purposes of this plan is as follows. And before I describe it, I need to say that this is just our assumption for this plan. It's something that we're actively working on at the moment. We think it's highly likely this will change, but for the reasons I'm about to describe, we've done it in this particular way. So what the Ofgem transition timetable showed was that there was, for each segment, there was a period of time over which participants in that segment could go live. What we've assumed is that each segment goes live on a specified date, advanced and unmetered first, and then smart afterwards, on a specified date, and that all participants are ready on that date. And the reason that we've done that is because in the CCDG recommendation for a sort of a phased, few months over which participants could join in and go live, there's potentially an issue with restriction of customer choice, which various stakeholders are not happy with. And the issue here is that if you have, in a given segment, if you have some suppliers live and others not, you could have a situation where an MPAN is migrated into the new settlement arrangements, and then the consumer of that relating to that MPAN switches to a supplier who's not yet on those arrangements. Now, as the design stands, that is not possible. So during that period, there would be a restricted choice that the consumer, once their MPAN's been migrated, can then only switch to suppliers who are live on market-wide half-hourly. So in order to recognise the existing design, we've done it in this particular way. Now, what we are looking at actively at the moment, and this is all work that's going on in the background and in conjunction with the migration working group, and we've talked about it also in the planning working groups, is the possibility of being able to do that reversal. So that customer choice, even if it's only for a period that's relatively short of a few months, customer choice won't be restricted. So we fully expect this to change, and this is something that we are working to resolve and to have a better proposition to go with by the time we put out the plan for round 2 of the consultancy.
Although, just to reinforce the fact, Kate, that reverse migration option is just one of a range of options that we are looking at, and there's no particular view that is a better option than any other. In fact, it's probably in some cases a worse option, and therefore may not actually be the one that we follow. But yes. I agree, it's a big area of ambiguity in the plan at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we do recognise is that it's, we want to incentivise participants to come join us in SIT and to get live with this system early. And we do recognise that having a sort of phased period over which go live can happen is an incentive to those who wish to move fast. And it's an incentive to them to join us in SIT as well. So, recognising that, we are really trying hard to find a way that works where we can have a go live kind of where participants come in over a period. Anyway. Okay, so that's the SIT route. So the non-SIT route is the same at the beginning. There's a planning period, there's potentially procurement and so on. And then that drops into DBT. And then what we've done, and this is a little bit of an artificial distinction, but we just did it to make it equivalent to the top swim lane. We split the development up into market interface and services first, and then back-end systems afterwards. So, you know, we're not dictating that you do 14 months and then you do 24 months or part of 24, or that in fact you do one after the other. It's entirely up to you. This is just for kind of representational purposes. So fundamentally, what we've assumed is that qualification, so we've timed qualification to start at a point in SIT where we believe that we've got sufficient comfort that the overall design, you know, the systems correspond to the overall design and that it all works. And that we've had a bit of sandbox execution go on, which is an additional comfort for that. And then we start qualification. So the idea is that, you know, it doesn't matter if you're not in SIT, it doesn't matter how you do your development, as long as you turn up in time for qualification, then that's the main thing. Now, qualification is one of the things where there is some uncertainty and there are some fairly big questions that need to be answered. We've got the qualification working group starting next week, which is next Tuesday. So I would encourage you to participate if you possibly can. And there are some big questions that need answering. And talking about this has just reminded me of another one, which I just need to note down. So the big questions are things like, is it qualification or is it requalification? Exactly, you know, what exactly is the scope of it? And the thing that I hadn't written down before, but is in what unit do you have to qualify? So, for example, if you are proposing a processing service, which is part of the smart data service, can you qualify as that, or do you have to qualify as a smart data service as a whole? So there are important questions about that. We've been talking to the BSc PAB. We need to start talking also to REC and SEC, RECCO and SECUS, because we need to get their views, because obviously not all roles in MHHS are going to be governed by the BSc. So we need to work across the codes on this, although the majority of it is BSc. So just a little bit about our thinking so far on this, and this is represented in the pack. What we are thinking so far in terms of qualification is that there'll be 3 elements to it. That the first element will be when you guys do your PIT, your pre-integration test in our terms, which probably in your terms is your user acceptance test, whatever it is, that there will be a requirement for you to demonstrate certain things or to certify certain things. And in order to exit PIT and get into what we're calling qualification testing, you will need to demonstrate these things. Now, the way that responsibilities cut up in terms of qualification, again, we need to, we're in the process of firming this up, but what the intention at the moment is that the BSc PAB is responsible for running the qualification. So it is they who would give you a tick in the box saying, yes, your PIT stuff looks all right, you can start qualification testing. They will manage the qualification testing and they will ensure that it's done properly and give you a tick in the box when you've demonstrated everything in that you need to do. And that would be, the actual testing would be done on the UIT environment, and that would be controlled using, you know, entering test execution into ADO, which then can be managed centrally. So that's the PIT aspect, and then there'll be a qualification testing aspect on the UIT environment. The third aspect, and again, we're not sure exactly what form this will take, but so the two aspects I've described so far are about the interfaces and the services, exactly the same components that go into SIT. What we also want to get some comfort on is for suppliers that your back-end systems have been upgraded, your operational processes and procedures have been upgraded and take account of market-wide half-hourly, and that they can operate at scale, that your exceptions processes work at scale for doing the migration, things like that. So there will be a third element, which will be potentially tested on the UIT system. Potentially you can test in a standalone manner to somehow demonstrate that your back-end systems are going to be able to cope when market-wide half-hourly goes live. So all of that is still to play for, essentially. That will be in the qualification working group. The other thing to say about qualification is for the testing itself, it's likely that we'll do that in tranches, that it will be similar to faster switching, the way that they did it. That's not to say that we will cut the tranches up, do the composition of the tranches in exactly that way, but that we will have a number of tranches, and each participant will be assigned to a tranche to do the testing in order to make sure that we can cope with everybody testing over the period. So we've got 12 months for qualification. Our understanding of how long it takes to qualify, what people have been telling us, it varies from sort of 2 months to 6 months at the moment. That's not the actual testing, that's the kind of procedure, getting all the procedures right. So we have got more work to do in that space. It would be helpful to get input from you on how that could be streamlined, how long you think it's likely to take, and so on. So following qualification, then there's preparation for go live, and you've got the advanced and unmetered preparation for cut over to live, and then they cut over, and then you've got a 13-month migration window where MPANs move from the old arrangements to the new half-hourly arrangements. So that's the sort of critical path going through advanced and unmetered. Smart and non-smart comes on 2 months later and has a slightly shorter period for migration. And then at the very bottom, in the bottom swim lane, you've got the central systems, and that's fairly straightforward, with the caveat that what we're showing here is the worst case, that systems may go live earlier than that, but we haven't, at this sort of level of the plan, we're not showing them individually. Okay, I think that's it for that. So yes, Danielle, do you want to go on? Okay, go ahead.
Just one thing to say, that the eagle-eyed amongst you might realise that this slide is slightly different from the slide that you were provided with on Monday. We've just refined the critical path representation. So we'll update the document and re-upload it to the collaboration basin portal. That's the only change to the document, but we just wanted to let you know why it's changed slightly.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I've just gone to close a window because trouble with living in a London terraced house is that you get all the neighbours building work right in your bedroom all of the time. Right. Okay, next one. So this is looking in a little bit more detail at the first phase, the system design, build and test, and you can see where we come down from M5 into the impact assessment planning, and then procurement, and then drop into the DBT. And then we drop into preparation for sit and into the final into the control point at the end of this, which is when sit will start. So just one little thing to say about the control points. When you look at the more detailed plan, you'll see that the actual control point is a couple of weeks before before the start of sit, for example, or the other milestones to which they control points relate. And that's just so that we can take the decision in good time and then still have some preparation time to go before getting into the next phase.
We said the control point would be a separate review before the related PSG in any case, so it aligns in that respect to the plan.
Okay, next one. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'll just pick out some of the key issues, assumptions and risks. So transition design will not be ready by M5. So transition, one thing that I should kind of plug here is something that we've been trying to do on the migration working group is standardize the use of migration and transition. And we're standardizing on what CCDG defined them as when CCDG was working on this and into 2021. And that is transition is from now until we go live on the new settlement arrangements, and migration is the period at the end of transition where MPANs are moved over from the old to the new arrangements. So really, so this is migration design in some senses. So it's not going to be ready, but they are, the bones of it are there. And I understand reasonably well known, and it will be worked on as quickly as possible thereafter. Oh, I think I've just spotted an issue on the it says dubs when it should say duos, but anyway. And the last point on the issues, not allocated an appropriate owner for certificate management, likely but not certain to be the DIP provider. So that's kind of awaiting a decision on the DIP provider, and that the process for selecting the DIP provider is ongoing at the moment. And then assumptions, I think you all know that PIT is your own responsibility. One thing that I should have pointed out on the timescale is that when you guys are doing your design, build and test, something that's not marked on the chart, but which is helpful, is that we are going to be providing some test stubs, which are designed to make your lives a little bit easier and to standardize things. And the philosophy was, if something doesn't already exist and we can do it once in the center and provide it out, then that's helpful, rather than get all of you to do an extra piece of work yourselves. So the things that we intend to do to provide to help you are, first of all, a simulator which can simulate it, that assuming you're a data service, that can simulate your data service interaction with MDS and with LSS. So it will simulate the way the working of the DIP. It's not going to do anything with PKI. It's just going to be without any certificates. It's just going to be a simulation of the way that the DIP would work and the way that you would talk to those services. The other thing that we're going to do is provide a tool which will generate realistic consumption data. And the idea again is that this is helpful, hopefully, for data services, and we're going to do this for the smart segment and for the advanced segment, that we generate data in bulk that can be used. Now, obviously, it will be up to you to give a list of MPANs, to give their meter technical details and things like that, so that we can generate data that's realistic. And, you know, what was the last reading, or what was the last consumption figure? So all of this is being designed at the moment, with a view to delivering it, you know, as soon as we practically can. So those, the simulator of the LSS and MDS interactions and the data that will feed into the, if you like, into the top of a data service, that's intended to be available to you at some point during your design, build and test. Transition design, migration, yeah, we've talked about that. So looking at the key risks, yeah, so the second bullet point on the key risks, it may not be known how long participants' build will take until detailed designs are complete and the plans are completed. We acknowledge this. So in the sort of the 4-month planning period that follows the end of October, we will, at the end of that, we will be shining a bit of light on what do you now think is going to be your DBT schedule. Obviously, you know, this planning activity, this revision of the plan needs to come up with the answers, but then we will reconfirm those at that point when you've had a chance to do your more detailed planning. I think, oh yeah, and then the key risk, further market disruption over the coming months, you know, that is a key risk. It's something everybody's very conscious of, you know, which we need to mitigate as far as possible. Okay, next slide, please. So we've got integration testing, which is principally SIT. And if you look at the more detailed version of the plan, so this is an extract from the Excel showing the high level activities. If you go into the more detailed Excel, you'll see the SIT execution, you'll see all the different stages of the SIT. And this phase lasts from the beginning of SIT until the start of qualification. So it's that, which isn't the end of SIT. SIT carries on a bit more after qualification has started, but we've called from the beginning of qualification onwards the qualification phase. Do you want to go down, Danielle? And again, issues, assumptions and risks. Yeah, we're validating the SIT length of time needed. Any input from you on that would be very valuable. So one thing I haven't spoken about is SIT participation. So we are assuming that SIT participants are voluntary. Obviously, central parties need to be there. And this needs to be updated because LDSOs are not central parties, but that clearly they need to be in SIT as well, or at least we need some representation, which may be St. Clement's, but that's something else that we have to bottom out as well. Voluntary participation. What we are hoping to do is we've already had some indications of people who are or may be interested in participating in SIT. And we've talked to people a bit about what would incentivize them and what wouldn't. So what we're intending to do is firm up on SIT participation towards the end of the 4-month planning period, for you to do your planning post end of October with the design being signed off. So shortly after that, we're intending to firm up SIT participation. Now, that's not to say that all of a sudden at that point we'll suddenly go, oh my goodness, there's nobody participating, or, you know, it's going to be work in progress, talking to you possibly on an individual basis, between now and then. And gradually, bit by bit, we'll firm up who is able to and intending to participate. Risks: too few participants in SIT. I think too many is probably unlikely, but it's possible. The possible need for adapters and that coming in. So these are risks that we need to bear in mind. Okay, next slide, please, Danielle. Qualification testing. All right, so you can see that there's a tail end of SIT that goes on in qualification phase. And qualification goes on and ends in the milestones. You can see that the central systems go live first, and then this qualification phase ends when the first when the advanced and the unmetered go live. Now, and then it goes into the migration period, even though qualification will still be going on for SMART. Do you want to move on, Danielle? So picking out key issues, roles and responsibilities for qualification, not yet fully agreed. We talked about that. Lots of questions on qualification testing. And yeah, we shouldn't necessarily think of this just as qualification testing. It's qualification in general, so that there will be some testing we'll ask you to do on the UIT environment, but qualification is much wider than that. Nothing particularly to pick out on this. I think we've covered most of the points there. Do you want to move on, Danielle? Okay, and then we've got migration. And so migration phase, we've said, starts with advanced and unmetered going live. And then after a couple of months, you've got SMART going live. So you've got 11 months to migrate all the MPANs on SMART, and you've got 13 months to migrate for advanced and unmetered. And the final milestone here is that full transition, the migration is complete. And then what's not shown on here, and we've got in the plan a couple of months later, I think it is that the new settlement arrangements kick in. I think the original Ofgem transition timetable had that happening as migration completed, but we've given it another couple of months for things to settle down before the new settlement timetable comes in. And go on to the next one, Danielle. Right, so I think the issues, assumptions and risks are things that we spoke about, that we've taken a particular approach and assumptions to do with migration and the way that that starts because of restrictions on consumer choice potentially causing issues. So I think next one, Danielle, I think that's it then, isn't it? And back to Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Before we go to the glossary, the thing I would say is obviously what we're doing at the moment is sharing quite openly and honestly with you the areas of ambiguity or uncertainty. There's stuff we need to do, there's stuff you need to do. What we felt was the important thing was to engage you early in this stuff. We could have sorted out and reduced the uncertainty and addressed the assumptions we're making a bit further and started this process later. But actually, to the point I was making earlier, which is that we want to build this plan with you, we felt that it's better to be honest and come in early, even though there are those uncertainties, which we'll jointly work on as we go through. And if any of you are part of that volunteer group, we can understand the impact on the plan as we develop it for round 2. So I hope you'll understand the spirit in which we followed the principles that I showed earlier on of being open and transparent about what we're doing, and trusting you to kind of understand that things are not perfect at this stage. And actually, as we go through the planning process, even in round 2, we will still have uncertainties and still have assumptions in the plan when we baseline it. And some of those assumptions will have to be dispelled as we go through the programme, and there may be changes to the plan later on, and that's the nature of a planning process. So I think you'll probably understand where we're at the moment, and the idea was to outline that more clearly. There's a couple of last slides which address one of the questions that was in the chat. On the last slide, Danielle, so we put in some basic glossary there, but there is a really good interactive glossary on the collaboration-based portal, which I would suggest those of you who are struggling with the acronyms could access, and I use it all the time, by the way. So it's nothing, there's a lot of stuff in there that sometimes I have to go and double check as well. So we did that quite early on because we recognised that there are people coming into the programme from different perspectives and backgrounds and experience who may be more or less comfortable with the terms that are used. So that is it for the presentation. We've got some time left for Q&A. I just wanted to cover the bits that came out in the chat before we then ask for hands raised. So yeah, the milestone M references are just the, so M9, for example, doesn't mean 9 months. It just means M9 is the Ofgem title for start of SIT, for example. So that's what that means. This deck, by the way, was shared as part of the consultation artifacts on Monday. So it is in the documents that you've been linked into. So the primary contact in your organisations has got the links to this to these artifacts, and if you weren't aware of that, then that's something that we can sort out. So as I said, we're updating slide 18, I think, slightly with the critical path information, and we'll replace the documents that relate to that, just for clarity. There was one question in the chat specifically from Simon. Will qualification fully enable new agent participants to enter the market?
Yeah, so yes, but I think the only rider on that is this issue of what unit do you qualify in, and that's obviously very relevant to you guys, because as agents, do you need to, for example, do you need to team up with a supplier in order to do your qualification, things like that. That we don't yet know. But once you've qualified, yes, you can enter the market.
Okay. Right, it's time for hands up then. Anybody who wants to ask a question, will first come, first served.
We've got another question from Lee in the chat.
Oh, do we?
Just asking when the qualification approach will be delivered. Okay.
I think I think it's early next. Yeah, it'll be in the plan. I can't remember off the top of my head, Lee. It's in a few months' time.
Is there something that could be done at a more summary level then earlier, because that's going to inform some of the planning?
Yeah, so what we've got, sorry, I've just got brain freeze. So there are two things that are relevant to qualification. So there's a pre-qualification guidelines, and that will have information that will help you plan. It'll contain stuff like it won't contain the last word in detail, but generally what you need to do in PIT, what do you and therefore get signed off before you enter qualification, what do you need before qualification, and things like that. So that will have information in it, and that is due to be delivered sooner, and the full qualification approach and plan will follow that. And have a look in the plan and see where it comes.
Okay.
I can't off the top of my head remember, but I would say that the pre-qual stuff is later this year, and the qualification approach and plan is early next year, something like that.
Well, I think the guidance is in the interim plan, which means it's this year. Yeah.
Yes, I think the guidance is end of October, but don't don't kind of quote me on that.
No, you're right. You're right, Kate. It is the end of October.
Right. I'm going to say that hands up trumps questions in the chat because I did ask for hands up. So Johnny.
Cheers. Two quick questions, if it's okay. First one, I noticed that the code drafting isn't on the critical path. Now I know this is probably just system design, but can I just make sure that code drafting is being considered as part of the critical path?
It's absolutely being considered. It's not on the critical path because what we've said is that the testing, for example, the qualification testing, is going to be based on the MHHS design and not necessarily wait for all of the code to be ratified and all the rest of it before that qualification testing gets designed.
No, that's understood.
So
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm just thinking we can't really go live. We can't start migration until the code drafting is in
True.
place.
No, absolutely. And that's a really good point. I mean, maybe that's something that we should just add just to show that we need the codes to go live. Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
No. I mean, it is absolutely essential, Johnny. You're absolutely right. It's not on the critical path because it doesn't sit on that critical path at the moment because there's float after the delivery of the code changes. So it's not on that critical path. The critical path is through the SIT execution and the readiness for qualification, as Kate set out earlier, because the assumption is that we will be able to do that in a timely fashion.
Actually, when I say it should be represented, I'm having brain freeze because it is
in there.
It's in there as the M's. So there's M7 and M8, which is to do with the code drafting.
There's M6, M7 and M8 are all code drafting related. M6 is delivering the code draft. M7 is enacting Ofgem's Smart Meter Act powers to enable them to be implemented. And then M8 is the implementation. But they don't sit on the critical path, but they're all planned for. And we've got the right dependencies in there to enable them to be ready for start migration, as you said.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. Second question was just a point of clarity around transition. Kate, you were talking about transition, and it seemed that you were suggesting that suppliers or participants would migrate at a particular time on the path, with all their MPANs being in the new arrangements at the same time. Was that my lack of understanding, or is that the plan?
No, sorry, I wasn't being very clear. So what I was trying to say was that all suppliers in a given segment, our assumption for the purposes of this plan, which will change, our assumption is that all suppliers in a given segment will go live with their new systems on a given date. So that means at that point that they can start migrating. So it doesn't mean that they will suddenly have all their MPANs move over. But the critical thing about it is that from that point onwards, they can accept new MPANs on the new arrangements, come what may. So if it's a new registration or if it's a switch, they can accept that on the new arrangements. And then they have the whole, that period of 11 months or 13 months or whatever, to bit by bit migrate their own MPANs over. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I mean, I must admit, I think my expectation was that they would all go live on the same day with their systems until all past testing. But if we're going to do it differently, that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, we can revert back to the questions in the chat now. So Chris asked, what is the minimum set of entry criteria for entering the end-to-end Sandbox testing environment?
Yeah, hi Chris. Well, don't know at the moment, but basically it's have you done qualification testing, yes or no? If yes, you can go in. If you're a SIT entrant, it's when we get to the particular point in SIT where we think that we've proved enough of the systems that we'll open up the end-to-end sandbox. And at that point, any of the SIT participants who've completed the requisite tests will go in. If you're a SIT participant and you've actually had some problems and you've only managed to participate in 10% of it, then clearly you won't go in at that point. But assuming that you've kept up with things and you've gone through at the right pace, then at that point you'll be allowed in.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess my concern is what happened in SMART, where a requirement to get into end-to-end testing was to go through UEPT, and UEPT really didn't prove anything. It's more smoke testing that you can generate service requests. The real testing is to test your business processes, and UEPT, if anything, became something of a blocker to market readiness, in my opinion. I wouldn't like the same thing to happen here.
So when you say it was a blocker, in what sense?
Well, I mean, as an adapter provider, we actually developed a service to get people through UEPT as quickly as possible using automated testing scripts, purely so that they could get into an environment where they could do some real testing.
Right,
but,
okay.
But the fact that you can generate one of each of the service requests doesn't tell you anything about whether you're ready to go live in the market. And the same thing. It depends on what form qualification takes. I don't know, again, if you're looking to run a portion of the settlement timetable. I mean, if you're looking at 2 to 6 months, it sounds like that's in your thinking, but it really depends on the nature of qualification, how representative it is of live operation, and how quickly we can get through it.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting point, actually. I mean, one of the things that we are trying to do is learn from smart metering and the time that people needed in the end-to-end testing environment in smart metering, and testing all the processes and that sort of thing. And I think that's for me, that's one important thing that we've added into this plan, is putting in time for people in the sandbox. That wasn't reflected in the Ofgem transition timetable at all. It was sort of like straight on from qualification and sit pretty much into migration, without the recognition that you're going to need, as a large supplier, you're going to need months in that environment to test out all your processes and so on. So I get what you mean. So you mean the qualification shouldn't be a blocker, in the sense that it takes a long time to perform, but adds very little value, and therefore holds people up from doing the important testing that they want to do in the sandbox. That's what you mean? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, all right. Really interesting point, thank you.
Okay, Matt's covering both bases by putting a question in the chat and raising his hand. So Matt.
Hey Matt.
I've got 2 questions, that's why. I'll go with my second one first, because that's kind of related to what we've been talking about. Is there an assumption that, or it looks like there's an assumption that if we go through SIT, you don't need to go through qualification?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Now, quite how that works, again, like many of these questions, I just don't know.
Although
Cool.
I would say, Kate, you've talked about some of the checks that might be done on the back office system elements, and so if SIT is executing tests that doesn't include that might be an incremental element for qualification.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what we need to figure out. I mean, I suspect that we're going to include a few things like that in SIT, but let's work all that out. Yeah.
And then the other question I had was, I've had a look at the detailed plan a little bit, and I can't see anything for performance assurance design or definition. Is that deliberate because I'm trying to find something that's too low level, or is it just something that isn't considered in the plan?
You want me to cover that?
Yeah, go for it, Jason. Yeah.
Because I think, Matt, I think we are having some discussions with your performance assurance colleagues, because I think the responsibility for performance assurance is going to sit probably under the Elexon PAB, and not under our responsibility for delivery. So we'll help set out the framework for qualification as part of performance assurance, but the overall performance assurance arrangements are going to be delivered by those people who are responsible for performance assurance. So it's an active discussion at the moment, Matt. We can pick up separately as well on it.
It still has anyone who's going through this has a dependency on performance assurance. Designs being defined at some point fairly soon, right?
I agree, and I think from our perspective, it's an external dependency and something that's being delivered by in the Elexon world by the Elexon performance assurance team.
Yeah.
So yes, it is deliberate.
But it is a clear dependency that needs to be documented and managed quite actively, because anything that's not within the entire control of the program is something we would worry about until we're clear about the party that is managing that. Okay, great. So the next hand up is Dave.
Hi, just a consideration really that migration, MPANs are migrating from a particular, I believe, from a particular settlement date, and we'll be in a position where you're on a new system for an MPAN from a given date.
Yeah.
Any consideration of the runoff of old systems, because they will be both running at the same time with a 14-month settlement period. So yeah, all your MPANs might be on the new system, but they are still operating on the old systems for 14 months. Where does that sit in the plan? Is that a milestone? Is it old systems decommissioned?
Yeah, so we haven't explicitly put that on the plan because we haven't sort of looked at the early life running bit of it. I understand, and Jason, correct me if this is wrong, I'm pretty sure that the intention is to do the 4-month run, that once all the MPANs are over, or as many of them as is practically possible, that to take the 4-month run, I can't remember what run that's called, and then after that's been done, to shut off the old systems and deal with things as exceptions thereafter. So I don't believe the intention is to do the full 14 months after the MPANs have been migrated. Does that make sense?
Okay, so you'll say that whatever the position is at 4 months, that's what it is. That's considered final.
Well, with subject then to a sort of I was going to say off the books, but you know what I mean, exceptions process that would be outside of the old systems. But I don't know the details of that, and that is definitely something that's worthwhile thinking about, because I cannot think where I got that information from.
All right, well,
Let me
we
dig
would,
around.
in the consultation responses, it'd be good to highlight that concern, and we can
Yeah.
ensure that there is a relevant assumption made or plan identified in relation to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that is the transition element rather than the migration element, as Kate referenced earlier. I think Johnny's.
All right. Somebody's saying the runoff is still being debated.
That's right.
Right. Okay. Fine.
I was going to say that I think it's still being covered
Right.
under some of the transition arrangements, but I'm
Yeah.
not totally clear, to be honest.
We've got
Okay. I think I'm just thinking, Dave, that where I got that from was from the CCDG papers potentially, because it's something I read quite a long time ago. So TBA, I think, is the answer on that one, really.
Okay,
Yeah, okay, sorry.
I was thinking more of a point of view that it being reflected in the plan somewhere as a recognised activity, that there will be both systems running at the same time to a point, potentially.
So we've only kind of gone up to the cut over to the new timetable. Well, let's have a think about taking it on further once we get certainty from the design groups.
Okay.
Yeah. Round 2 plan, we'll have to build in the early life running stuff anyway. Right,
Yeah.
we've got 2 more questions in the pipe. The first one is from Simon. Will prospective new agent parties be allowed to enter SIT as a SIT party?
Yes, absolutely. Now, quite what the jigsaw puzzle of agents having a supplier and things like that. We've got to work all that out. But yeah, I mean, please come and join us in SIT.
Right, that was easy. And then Johnny's got a question in the chat. The runoff is still being discussed in design groups in the transition, as far as I'm aware. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, good. Well, we have 9 minutes left. Kevin's got a hand up now.
Oh, hi there. Thank you very much for today. As someone who's not really been engaged with market-wide so far, because I've been on faster switching and I'm transitioning, it's been very useful. Couple of questions I have, especially coming from that experience as well. Are you taking any sort of lessons learned from what has happened with faster switching into this program to understand where some of the gotchas might be as you go through the SIT activities, implementation, execution, and so forth?
Yeah. Do you want to? All right, let me go. I'll go first, and then I'm sure you guys can chip in. So just to let you know, Kevin, Keith, Jason, and I have both been. We've both spent significant portions of our lives over the last few years on faster switching. Yeah, Jason and me probably more longer than others, but anyway, yes, absolutely. So, you know, for me, one of the things that we wanted to do was around comms with participants, and that the answer to that is we're going to provide essentially an intranet site, the portal, which allows you to interact with the program in a seamless way and do everything you need. Now, so and we're developing that in an agile manner, so things are, facilities are being added all the time. So it's not yet at full functionality, but I think when it is, it's already proving absolutely invaluable. And when it's at full functionality, I think it will. You'll notice a big difference from having a disparate, having to go to Salesforce or get organized, or the dev portal from Landmark. All this sort of fragmented nature of things won't be there. And what we really, really want people's feedback. We want to make the portal as useful as is humanly possible. So if something is not right about it, we want to know about it, or if something could be done better, we want to know. So that was, for me, that was one thing. Testing. I think there are various things. So I should also say that Adrian Ackroyd, who is the on the Elexon side, on the MHHS SRO team, was obviously intimately involved in faster switching as well, and in the integration testing. So there are various things there. I think there are. So the way that we've organised SIT is a direct lesson, I think. And what we've done in SIT, if you look at the plans, you can see that we start off with a thing that we've called component integration testing. And what that is 3 months of essentially adding one by one each component until you've made up the whole big picture of everything that we need to do the proper SIT functional testing. And, that's learning the lessons from faster switching of connectivity wasn't enough. And then adding on basic message exchange, and then that, all of that kind of the startup of SIT, and the fact of trying to do everything all at once and not having it very structured, we're trying to overcome that. And the other thing, I think, which made gauging the status difficult in faster switching, was that there was testing that went on kind of outside the stages, so that the connectivity and the basic message exchange, that wasn't part of SIT, so people weren't monitoring it. It was, it was in this kind of no man's land. So what we're trying to make sure is that everything is in a particular stage, and it's tested in the stage where it's appropriate and not elsewhere. Another thing was that, faster switching SIT functional tested, on my reckoning, about 85% of the functional stuff, not more, because it didn't do any of the choreography. And so my job title is test architect. So it's basically my job to make sure that everything is tested in an appropriate depth, in an appropriate place, by the right people, all of that stuff. And so I've got to kind of hold the overall vision and make sure all that happens.
Thank you. It's good that you're taking some of those lessons and bringing it through. I know it's a very open question, so thank you very much for
that. So that's just me picking out a couple of the main things. There are more. Be very, very happy to have a chat with you directly about it. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kevin.
I noticed there's no other questions, so I might be cheeky and ask a second one. Something that I've experienced, I've been working in energy now for 14 years, and I very rarely see these big bang kind of deliveries ever go on the intended implementation date. So I know we said we're going to be carefully monitoring this. This is already a replan, right? So that we're already seeing a little bit of slippage. How will we keep that? How will we keep that dialogue? How will we intend as a program, as a collective, to keep that dialogue and trying to react as early as we can? I know we kind of mentioned it, keep a little bit earlier, but it's something I think we should all keep a focus on, because it will happen almost assuredly, even though obviously Ofgem probably don't want it to happen. I think we have enough history to show that there's a likelihood, a fair percentages, that it could happen.
I would say, Kevin, by the way, although I know it's termed replan, in my mind, it's a plan. We have a timetable that's had some thinking behind it before, but you know the assumptions that were made on that were quite a long time ago. This is a proper kind of proper process of planning, so I would see this as the first opportunity to validate high-level timeline that was put in place, and therefore I don't really see it as a replan, if I'm honest with you. I see it as a first occasion to properly plan it through with the participants who have to help us deliver it. So in that sense, it's probably a better way of terming it. But as far as the other question is concerned, I don't know who's best to answer that one. I can't really remember what the rest of the question was.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's a long-winded one. How do we ensure open dialogue communication around moving the ball when it needs to, when we've seen that there isn't enough time to implement ready for SIT, when there isn't enough time or evidence from SIT output that we're not ready for the next phase? How do we keep that and try and be as proactive around that as possible?
Well, partly we've got these fire breaks in the programme, so you can't move from one section to the next without a proper conversation. As I said, the control points are fire breaks. They're proper kind of things that you have to jump over in order to get it. So that would be the first thing. And you know, we would have in place we've got all the right governance forums in place, and the other arrangements are set out in the test plan as it's developed. So we just need to continue to learn lessons. I mean, that's not to say fast switching wasn't successful. It's gone live and it's been successful, but there are ways in which we need to accelerate and be more efficient in our delivery. So it's not a direct criticism of faster switching. It's just how can we do it better and more efficiently, given the Rachel Clark challenge to us to get this done as quickly as possible. Yeah. And it's in that context. I wouldn't want people to think that we're being overly critical of any other programme. And it has gone live, but we just need to do it quicker, more efficiently. That's the challenge we've been set. So it is all in the right kind of early warning signs and signals. And you know, we have a program RAID structure that allows participants to contribute to the RAID. You know, we're not running a central RAID log. This is the industry RAID log, and there's a process by which you can raise your concerns into the RAID, and they'll be managed through governance. And that's again through the portal. So to Kate's point, we're going to have through the portal much more fluid dialogue about things that we're worried about, early warning signs and signals and so on. So we would hope that by having that one way of providing that, plus the PPC team that's having bilaterals and conversations on a regular basis and having, if you like, those fluid conversations that you can't necessarily have so easily in plenary sessions. So I think that the way in which we're going to run this is somewhat different in terms of getting closer to industry and having those contacts, and that's why the PPC team was set up as well. I realise we've timed out now, and I think yours was the last question, Kevin, but again, more than happy to have separate conversations if you would find it helpful. So I'd like to bring it to a close. I hope people have found it helpful today. It is the start of the process of the 4-week consultation. Well, we're 2 days in now, but as I say, please do make the effort to give us your feedback on round 1 as much as you can, as much thinking as you can put in place, just to make sure that we have the best chance of getting round 2 done properly. We'll let you go.
Thank you very much for your time, guys.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.